She stood on the side of the road, clutching her coat tighter around her, and glancing nervously at her phone. Dead, of course. It had been one of those mornings. Her babysitter canceled last minute. She missed her bus, and now she was stranded, running late for her second shift at the diner. Her name was Sarah, a single mom just trying to make it through each day. With rent overdue and groceries getting harder to afford, asking a stranger for a ride was the last thing she wanted to do. But today, she didn't have a choice. That's when a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. The driver rolled down the window. It was a man in a crisp suit, polished watch catching the sunlight. Everything about him screamed money. Sarah hesitated. Was it safe? Was he serious? Still, something about his calm voice and kind eyes made her say yes. She had no idea who he really was. As the car rolled through the city streets, their small talk slowly turned into something deeper. He asked questions no one had bothered to ask her in a long time. He listened. She laughed, almost forgetting the chaos of her day. But when she mentioned where she worked, his expression changed, just for a second. She didn't notice it then. Not yet. What Sarah couldn't have known was that the man behind the wheel wasn't just a kind stranger. He was a millionaire CEO, the head of one of the most successful companies in the state. And their meeting, it wasn't as random as it seemed. But why had he stopped? And what did he see in her that made him take that unexpected turn? Stick around, because what happens next will completely surprise you. Sarah had no clue she was sitting next to a man whose face had once been on the cover of a major business magazine. To her, he was just a kind stranger offering a ride when she needed it most. She thanked him softly, still unsure why someone like him would even bother stopping for someone like her. Her coat was old, her shoes scuffed, and her tired eyes told the story of too many sleepless nights. But he didn't seem to notice any of that, or if he did, he didn't show it. His name was Daniel, but he didn't offer that at first. Instead, he listened. He asked about her son, about her job, about how she managed everything on her own. She was surprised at how easy it was to talk to him. Most people didn't want to hear about her struggles, but Daniel wasn't like most people. Still, there was something about him she couldn't quite place. He had that calm, practiced way of speaking, like someone who was used to being in control. As they neared her workplace, she thanked him again and started to open the door, but he paused. "Are you happy there?" he asked. She blinked, confused. No one had ever asked her that. Happy? She worked long hours for barely enough to scrape by. But before she could answer, he smiled politely and said, "Never mind. Just curious." He drove off before she could say more. What Sarah didn't know was that Daniel had recognized the diner the moment she mentioned it, because he owned it. And this wasn't the first time he'd driven past it, wondering about the people working inside. But this time, something told him to stop. And he wasn't done with Sarah's story just yet. Sarah rushed into the diner, tying her apron as she went, still thinking about the man in the black car. Something about him lingered in her mind, though she quickly pushed the thought aside. There were orders to take, dishes to clear, and her manager already throwing sharp glances her way for being late, again. The tips hadn't been great lately, and with her son's school needing supplies she couldn't afford, the weight on her shoulders felt heavier than ever. Meanwhile, Daniel sat in his high-rise office, distracted for the first time in weeks. His assistant handed him a folder, rattling off numbers and investor updates, but his thoughts kept circling back to Sarah. He built his company from the ground up, once struggling himself before making it big. Maybe that's why she struck a chord. Or maybe it was something else, her resilience, her quiet strength. He told himself it was curiosity. Nothing more. But it wasn't just a passing thought anymore. Later that week, Daniel returned to the diner. This time, he didn't sit in his car. He walked in like any other customer and took a seat in the far corner. Sarah didn't notice him right away. She was too busy juggling plates and wiping tables. But when she finally did, her breath caught for a moment. He looked out of place there, too polished, too calm. She approached his table cautiously, unsure what to say. He smiled like nothing was unusual. "Didn't expect to see you here," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I was in the neighborhood," he replied casually. But it wasn't casual. Not for him. And definitely not for her. What Sarah didn't know was that someone else had noticed Daniel too. And not everyone was happy he was there. The diner had never felt this tense before. Sarah could feel eyes on her as she poured Daniel a cup of coffee. Her manager, Carl, stood behind the counter with his arms crossed, watching closely. He didn't like surprises, and a man like Daniel showing up twice in 1 week. That was definitely a surprise. Sarah tried to act normal, but she could feel something shifting. She didn't know if it was Daniel's presence or the way Carl's mood had suddenly turned colder. "You know him?" Carl asked later when Daniel stepped outside to take a call. "Not really," Sarah answered. "He gave me a ride once." Carl narrowed his eyes. Men like that don't give rides for free. The word stung, but she didn't respond. She'd dealt with judgment before, people assuming things because she was a single mom, working a low-wage job. But this felt different, like something was brewing that she couldn't yet name. Outside, Daniel ended his call and stood looking through the glass, watching Sarah move behind the counter. He hadn't told anyone at the company where he was going. If word got out he was spending time at one of his smaller locations, especially one losing money, there'd be questions. He could already hear the board asking why he cared so much. He didn't have the answer himself. But he wasn't the only one with secrets. Carl had his own reasons for being nervous. The diner was barely hanging on. And if the owner discovered what he'd been hiding, well, it wouldn't end well. As Daniel stepped back inside and locked eyes with Sarah again, she felt the air shift. Something big was coming. She could feel it in her gut. And by the end of that night, everything was "We need to talk." Sarah stepped back, suddenly unsure if she should even be standing there. Daniel looked caught off guard for the first time since she'd met him. "Not here," he muttered, but the woman wasn't backing down. "Your board called an emergency meeting. They know you've been coming here. They think you're planning something." Sarah turned away, pretending to wipe a table nearby, but every word rang loud in her ears. Who was this woman? Someone from his company. And what did she mean, planning something? Daniel leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Keep your voice down." The woman didn't budge. "If this gets out, everything you've built could fall apart." Sarah's heart raced. She didn't understand what was happening, but she understood one thing clearly now. Daniel wasn't just some kind stranger with a big heart. He was someone important, someone with power, and apparently secrets. And she wasn't the only one who noticed the tension. Carl had been eavesdropping from behind the kitchen door. His eyes narrowed. If Daniel was who he suspected, then Sarah's connection to him might be more dangerous than she realized. Carl had too much to lose, and if Daniel was digging into the diner's books, he'd uncover things that had been buried for years. Outside, the sky darkened with an early storm. Inside, everything was starting to unravel. Sarah had no idea how close she was to the truth, or the danger. Rain hammered the windows as the diner's dinner rush thinned out, leaving only a few quiet booths and the tension hanging in the air. Sarah wiped down the counter, glancing at Daniel, who now sat alone. The woman had stormed out minutes ago, her heels clapping with frustration. Sarah couldn't take it anymore. She walked over, heart pounding. "Are you going to tell me what's going on?" she asked, voice low but steady. Daniel looked up, and for a moment, all the charm and calm melted away. He looked tired, honest. "I own this place," he said quietly. "I've owned it for years through a holding company. I never planned to get involved, but then I met you." Sarah took a step back, stunned. "Why didn't you say something?" "Because I was trying to understand what really goes on here," he said. "And I found more than I expected." He slid a folder across the table. Inside were invoices, numbers, falsified records. "Your manager's been stealing. For years." Just then, Carl appeared from the back, his face pale. He must have heard every word. "You don't know what you're talking about," he snapped. Daniel stood. "I do. And the police are already on their way." Carl lunged forward, desperate, but was stopped by another figure stepping in through the door, an officer in uniform. Within minutes, Carl was being led out in cuffs, shouting that none of this would have happened if Sarah had just stayed quiet. Sarah stood frozen, trying to take it all in. Daniel turned to her. "I could fix this place up, give you a real role here, if you wanted." She stared at him, still processing. And just when it felt like things were finally settling, her phone buzzed. It was a message from her landlord. Asterisk asterisk, the building had been sold asterisk asterisk. Sarah stared at her phone, the message staring back like a cruel joke. Asterisk, the building had been sold. You have 30 days to move out asterisk. It was the final blow in a week that already felt too heavy. She sat down at the counter, stunned. Just when she thought she could breathe again, reality knocked the air out of her. Daniel noticed the change in her face and walked over. "What happened?" She showed him the message, her voice barely a whisper. "Now I'm about to lose my home too." He didn't respond right away. Instead, he looked around the diner, this small, worn-out place that had just become the center of both their lives, and then back at her. "Come with me," he said, "just for a minute." They stepped outside into the rain, and he led her a block down, to an old storefront with boarded windows. "I bought this building last year," he explained. "Thought about turning it into an office or something, but maybe it's time for something else." She gave him a confused look, still shivering under her thin jacket. "What if we turned this into a new start, a small cafe? Your cafe, you run it, your name on the sign. Real hours, real pay, no one breathing down your neck." Sarah laughed under her breath, the sound catching between disbelief and relief. "You're serious." He nodded. "I've never been more serious." Weeks later, Sarah stood behind the counter of a freshly painted cafe, her son doing homework in the corner booth. The space felt alive. Hers. Customers came in, drawn by the warmth, the coffee, and the story they'd all heard whispers of. A single mom. A stranger. A chance meeting that changed everything. Because sometimes the worst days are just the start of something better.